At the top of the world, an invisible line traces the globe. The Arctic Circle. Beyond it in winter, the sun disappears entirely below the horizon, leaving the world in weeks of twilight and darkness. In summer, it never sets, turning night into a soft, endless day. The Arctic isn't one single place. It's a vast, shifting mosaic of sea and ice, tundra and mountain that stretch across 8 nations. In this journey, we will follow the Arctic Circle, tracing it across continents and oceans, from the northern shores of Russia to the fjords of Norway. From the tundra of Lapland to the glaciers of Greenland and the remote coasts of Canada and Alaska. We'll visit towns and islands that exist almost in defiance of geography. Places where life persists against the odds. The largest city in the world north of the polar circle is Murmansk. Despite its latitude, the harbour never freezes, a quirk of oceanic geography that changed the course of history. Warm currents from the North Atlantic flow into these waters, keeping the port ice-free even in the depth of winter. This made Murmansk a lifeline. First for Tsarist Russia, then for the Soviet Union, and still today for modern Russia's Arctic ambitions. During World War II, Murmansk became one of the Soviet Union's most important strategic ports. Allied convoys, loaded with tanks, food, fuel, and ammunition, braved the North Atlantic and Arctic storms to reach this coast. High on a hill overlooking the city stands the Alyosha Monument, a massive statue of a Soviet soldier watching over the harbour. Built in 1974, it commemorates the defenders of the Arctic during the war. The light here has its own rules. In winter, the sun never rises, just a dim glow on the horizon. In summer, it never sets. A 2-hour drive northeast of Murmansk, the asphalt ends at Teriberka. A fishing village scattered along a grey Arctic bay. For a long time, hardly anyone outside the Kola Peninsula had heard of this place. Then a film changed that. When Leviathan was released in 2014, its bleak beauty brought global attention to Teriberka. But the story here began long before cinema. For decades, its boats supplied Murmansk with fish, and a small harbour was alive with men hauling nets. Then, like many remote Arctic towns, it fell silent. The Soviet Union collapsed, the fishing quotas vanished, and the young left for cities. Down the road from the village on the shore of a quiet inlet lies Teriberka's most haunting sight, the ship graveyard. Dozens of wooden and steel fishing vessels rest half submerged in these shallows. Once the pride of a thriving fleet, they were left to rot when the fishing industry crumpled in the 1990s. But now, tourists arrive to see the edge of the world. There's a small guest house, a cafe that serves fresh cod soup, and a sense that life here is balancing between the past and something new. Stretching more than 3,400 miles, the Northern Sea Route is one of the most challenging shipping lanes on Earth. For centuries, it was more myth than map, a frozen corridor explorers dreamed of crossing but rarely survived. Over time, it became a working highway through the Arctic. Connecting Europe and Asia along Russia's northern rim. It begins in Murmansk, the Arctic's industrial heart and Russia's only major port that never freezes. From here, the route runs past the Kara Sea, Novaya Zemlya, and across the Laptev and East Siberian seas. Much of it remains locked in ice for most of the year. Only in recent decades, as the polar climate has warmed, has the navigation window widened. What once required constant escort by icebreakers can now, in a brief Arctic summer, be crossed by reinforced commercial ships. As global trade evolves and ice retreats, the world is watching this corridor with both fascination and unease. Murmansk is also home to the world's largest fleet of nuclear-powered icebreakers. Massive ships built to smash through polar ice. Each one is a floating fortress. Roughly 500 feet long, displacing over 23,000 tons and powered by twin nuclear reactors. From Murmansk, they head out each year to carve paths for cargo convoys and scientific expeditions. But these Leviathans have another, more unexpected role. They also carry tourists. A few times each summer, when the Arctic ice thins enough, the nuclear icebreaker Pięćdziesiąt Pobedy sets course for the North Pole. The voyage can last nearly 2 weeks, covering over 1,000 miles each way. There's no land at the pole, only shifting ice and endless light. When the ship finally reaches 90 degrees north, the engines fall silent. The passengers step off onto the frozen ocean, plant flags, take photos, and sometimes even swim. A few seconds in water just above freezing. About 70 miles south of Murmansk stand the Khibiny Mountains, the northernmost mountain range of European Russia. Though modest in elevation, barely exceeding 4,000 feet, they feel monumental against the flat Arctic plains that surround them. The Khibiny are rich in rare minerals, especially apatite and nepheline, used in fertilizers and industry. The first scientific expeditions came here in the early 20th century. Drawn by rumours of unique geological formations. What they found was a treasure chest of over 100 mineral species, some never seen before on Earth. Scientists often call this range a living laboratory of Arctic evolution. A place that shows how life adapts when pushed to the edge of survival. Beneath the surface, miners extract resources that feed the modern world. Above it, nature continues its slow rhythm, mostly unchanged. Halfway between Norway and the North Pole lies a cluster of islands where the midnight sun circles for months. And winter brings unbroken darkness. This is Svalbard, one of the northernmost inhabited regions on Earth. The archipelago stretches roughly 400 miles from north to south, and more than 60% of its surface is covered by ice. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, explorers and entrepreneurs realized that beneath the glaciers lay rich coal seams. Mining towns sprang up, some Norwegian, some Russian, some American. Each nation staked its own claim. And for decades, there was no clear rule over who owned what. That changed in 1920, when the Svalbard Treaty was signed in Paris. It granted Norway full sovereignty over the islands, but with an unusual condition. Citizens and companies from all signatory nations, including Russia, would have equal rights to engage in commercial activity. It was a diplomatic compromise that turned Svalbard into a shared zone, a place where rivals could coexist under one flag. The islands host something else remarkable. The global seed vault, built deep into a mountain outside Longyearbyen. It's designed to preserve the world's crop diversity in case of global catastrophe. A vault of life sealed in permafrost. The irony isn't lost on anyone. The permafrost itself is now thawing. The capital of Svalbard is Longyearbyen. A neat grid of colourful wooden houses tucked between steep mountains. It's the world's northernmost town, sitting at 78 degrees north, just 800 miles from the North Pole. A small but thriving community at the edge of the inhabited world. In 1906, American entrepreneur John Munro Longyear founded the Arctic Coal Company, giving the settlement his name. Back then, miners worked through months of darkness and isolation, carving coal from frozen ground under near impossible conditions. A century later, the mines are mostly silent, but Longyearbyen remains the beating heart of Svalbard, now powered by tourism and a sense of adventure. About 2,500 people live here: Norwegians, Russians, Thais, Ukrainians. And a rotating cast of researchers and wanderers. Every building stands on stilts to prevent melting permafrost from warping foundations. Even dying is discouraged. The cemetery closed decades ago when scientists discovered that bodies never decompose in the frozen soil. About 35 miles southwest of Longyearbyen, the signs turn from Norwegian to Cyrillic, and Soviet mosaics appear on concrete walls. In Barentsburg, a Russian mining town perched on the cliffs of Svalbard, the Soviet era never fully ended. Home to around 400 people, it's officially under Norwegian sovereignty, but operated by Russia's Arctic Coal Company. A relic of the 1920 Svalbard Treaty that allows all signatory nations to pursue commercial activity on the islands. In practice, Barentsburg feels like a small fragment of Russia, complete with its own school, post office and consulate. Surrounded by the vast Norwegian Arctic. Soviet apartment blocks rise beside newly renovated buildings painted in bright blues and reds. The local pub serves Russian beer brewed from glacier water, and a small museum displays mining tools and propaganda posters from the 1950s. Coal mining remains the backbone of Barentsburg's economy, though on a far smaller scale than in Soviet times. While there's still some life left in Barentsburg, across the icy waters of Billefjorden, Pyramiden has become a ghost city. Founded by Sweden in 1910, the town was sold to the Soviet Union in 1927, becoming a showcase of Soviet ambition in the high Arctic. Here at 78 degrees north, the USSR set out to prove that socialism could thrive even at the edge of the world. There were apartment blocks, a school, a swimming pool, and even a concert hall with a grand piano, the northernmost in the world. Soviet planners called Pyramiden a model city, a vision of what communism could achieve under the harshest conditions. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the mine's future became uncertain. By 1998, the last residents boarded ships and left. They didn't take much, only what could fit in a few crates. Everything else was left behind: books on shelves, instruments in classrooms, coffee cups on tables. Today, Pyramiden stands almost exactly as it was the day it was abandoned. The Arctic cold has preserved it with eerie perfection. In Svalbard, the polar bear isn't a symbol, it's a neighbour. There are around 3,000 bears living in the region. They are the undisputed rulers of the Arctic. Perfectly adapted to a world of ice. The polar bear is the largest land carnivore on Earth. Adult males can weigh up to 1,500 pounds and stand over 10 feet tall. Everything about them is built for survival in cold. Two layers of fur, thick skin, and a layer of fat that can reach 4 inches deep. Locals treat them with deep respect and caution. Outside of Longyearbyen and Barentsburg, everyone carries a rifle for safety, not for hunting. Polar bears are also an indicator of change. They depend on sea ice to hunt, travel, and raise their young. Each decade, the melt begins earlier and lasts longer. Cubs that once grew strong on seal blubber now face leaner seasons. Despite these challenges, the bears endure. They've lived through countless ice ages, shifting climates, and collapsing ecosystems. On the far eastern edge of Svalbard lies Ostfonna, one of the largest glaciers on the planet and one of the least known. A white sheet stretching more than 3,000 square miles, roughly the size of Delaware. The glacier constantly creeps toward the sea at a pace of several feet per day. When it reaches the coast, it breaks apart in towering cliffs. On warmer days, rivers of meltwater carve deep channels across the glacier's surface, twisting and shining like veins of liquid glass. At the edge, they burst through the ice in spectacular waterfalls that plunge straight into the Arctic Ocean. Seen from a distance, it's an astonishing sight. Blue cascades tumbling from a white wall, vanishing into the grey sea below. Each waterfall marks a pulse of the glacier's slow surrender to a warming world. Back on mainland Norway, the cliffs of Nordkapp rise nearly 1,000 feet above the Arctic Ocean. Located at 71 degrees north, it's one of the continent's most recognisable landmarks. A windswept plateau marking where land meets the polar sea. Though it feels like the end of the world, it's also surprisingly accessible. A well-paved road connects it to a nearby fishing town. The name goes back to 1553, when the English navigator Richard Chancellor gave it the title North Cape while searching for a northeast passage to Asia. Although often described as the northernmost point of Europe, that title technically belongs to a small peninsula about a mile further north. But Nordkapp, with its easy access and panoramic views, became the symbolic destination. And eventually one of Norway's most visited landmarks. At the top, a massive steel globe erected in 1978 marks the end of the continent. Standing beside it, surrounded by sea and wind, you realise there's nothing north of here but water and ice. More than 1,300 miles of it before you reach the North Pole. Hidden on island along the jagged coast of northern Norway, Skjervøy has always been an ordinary coastal fishing settlement. With around 2,500 residents, it's small but active. A place where fishing boats and ferries share the same harbour. But today, it's known for something extraordinary. The winter gathering of orcas that has turned these quiet waters into one of the most remarkable wildlife spectacles. Each winter, millions of Atlantic herring migrate into the fjords to overwinter in the relatively mild waters. The herring are followed by their natural predators, the orcas. Until about a decade ago, this migration took place further south, around Tromso. But as herring stocks shifted northward, the whales followed. Skjervøy suddenly found itself at the centre of one of Europe's most active whale-watching regions. The town adapted quickly. Fishermen now work alongside tour operators, and marine scientists use the opportunity to study both species up close. Life here follows the same patterns it has for generations. Long winters, brief summers, and a strong connection to the sea. About 200 miles north of the Arctic Circle lies Tromso, a city that began as a small trading post in the 13th century. By the 1800s, it had grown into a vital port for Arctic hunting and fishing expeditions. Whalers, trappers, and explorers all passed through here. Many of the great polar expeditions, including those led by Roald Amundsen and Fridtjof Nansen, used Tromso as their final stop before sailing north. Fishing remained the backbone of its economy for centuries, but over time, Tromso developed as a scientific outpost. It's home to the Arctic University of Norway, one of the world's leading institutions for polar studies. The city centre occupies a narrow island connected to the mainland by a bridge and tunnel. Colourful wooden houses line the waterfront. And behind them, the Arctic Cathedral. A modern landmark built in 1965 resembles a shard of ice. Across the bridge lies Mount Storsteinen, accessible by cable car, offering a view of the entire city surrounded by silver blue fjords. East of Tromso, the Lyngen Alps rise sharply from the fjords. A jagged wall of mountains stretching nearly 60 miles. Their snow-covered ridges, deep valleys and hanging glaciers make them one of Norway's most striking landscapes. The mountains climb directly from sea level to over 6,000 feet, forming a continuous chain of peaks and glaciers. The Lyngen Alps are not widely inhabited. Scattered fishing villages and Sami settlements line the coast, while the interior remains almost entirely wild. More than 140 ice caps cling to the range, constantly shifting and reshaping the terrain. Meltwater from glaciers feeds turquoise rivers that twist through the tundra. Skiers, climbers and hikers come from around the world for what's called skiing from summit to sea. A rare experience where you can descend thousands of feet on untouched snow and end your run almost at the shoreline. If Norway could be condensed into one island, it might look like Senja. Norway's second largest island, about 620 square miles of cliffs, fjords, mountains. Locals call it Norway in miniature because within a few hours' drive, you can see nearly every type of landscape the country is known for. Despite its size, Senja remains largely off the main tourist trail. The island's western coast faces the open Norwegian Sea and takes the full force of the Atlantic. Here, mountains rise straight from the water. Villages cling to narrow strips of flat land between cliffs and sea. On the eastern side, the land softens. The mountains roll into hills and the fjords are calm, their surfaces broken only by fishing boats. One of the most famous viewpoints on Senja is Segla, a towering 2,000-foot peak rising vertically from the fjord. The view from its summit is pure Arctic drama, a sea of peaks and ridges falling into dark blue water. South of Senja, another archipelago stretches across the Norwegian Sea in a broken chain, the Lofoten Islands. The climate here is unusually mild for such a northern latitude. Thanks to the North Atlantic Current, the sea remains navigable year-round. That's part of what made Lofoten so important for centuries. It was one of the great fishing grounds of the North Atlantic. Every winter, millions of Arctic cod migrate south from the Barents Sea to spawn along these coasts. For generations, this migration meant life itself for the people who lived here. The population of Lofoten is around 24,000, spread across small fishing towns and coastal villages. Many of these communities still follow the same patterns of work dictated by the sea. But tourism has quietly joined as a second lifeline. At the far western edge of the Lofoten Islands, where the road runs out against the Norwegian Sea, Reine and Hamnoy grow straight from the rocks. Red wooden cabins perch on stilts above cold turquoise water, framed by granite peaks that rise nearly vertical from the fjord. Reine, the larger of the two, sits on a narrow peninsula on the island of Moskenesøya, surrounded by water on three sides. Towering above the village is Reindeer, a steep mountain rising about 1,500 feet above sea level. For years, the path to the summit was little more than a narrow, eroded trail. But in 2019, a group of Nepalese Sherpas completed a carefully built stone staircase carved into the slope. From the top, the entire landscape opens up. A mosaic of islands, fjords, and distant peaks stretching toward the horizon. Across the bridge, Hamnoy occupies a tiny neighbouring island. A cluster of råbur, the traditional fishermen's cabins once rented to seasonal crews. In the past, dozens of these cabins filled the harbour every winter, their occupants arriving for the great cod season. The fish is caught, cleaned, and hung on wooden racks called hyel. Left to dry in the cold, salty air. The process produces stockfish, Norway's oldest export, unchanged since Viking times. Even today, the harbours of Reine and Hamnoy fill with the same wooden frames, the same smell of drying fish. As the scenic E10 highway bends following the rugged coastline, a stretch of white sand suddenly appears. Ramberg Beach. One of the most photographed places in the Lofoten Islands, not because it's dramatic, but because it feels quietly unreal. The sand is pale, almost tropical in colour, and the water shifts from deep turquoise to icy blue. Yet the temperature rarely climbs above 55 degrees Fahrenheit, and the sea is cold year-round. In summer, when the midnight sun hangs low over the horizon, the beach glows with soft light that never quite fades. In winter, it's covered in frost and snowdrifts, framed by the dark silhouettes of the surrounding peaks. For travellers, it often becomes an unplanned stop. The contrast is what draws people in. White sand, turquoise waves, jagged mountains, and Arctic light all in one frame. Nusfjord, one of the oldest and best preserved fishing villages in all of Lofoten, sits at the head of a tiny fjord barely a half-mile long. Its harbour, calm and enclosed, has served as a natural shelter since at least the 18th century. Generations of fishermen have timed their work around the Lofotfisket, the great winter cod fishery. While Reine and Hamnoy are living fishing communities with modest tourism, Nusfjord offers a glimpse into history preserved in place. Wooden rawbure, many dating back to the 18th and 19th centuries, line the shoreline. During World War II, German forces burned many Lofoten villages, but Nusfjord's compact, rugged geography allowed it to recover, with much of its original layout intact. By the 1970s, recognising the village's historic value, Norway preserved Nusfjord as a cultural landmark. On the neighbouring island of Vestvågøy, a narrow road twists among cliffs, leading to Onstad, a small village tucked deep into a cove. A place that looks like it should belong to fishermen. Yet here, above the Arctic Circle, people ride waves beneath snow-covered peaks. Onstad Beach has become a quiet legend in the world of cold water surfing. Long before Instagram found it, a handful of locals started experimenting here in the 1960s. Two brothers from Lofoten brought surfboards back from Oslo and decided to try them in the North Atlantic. The idea sounded absurd, but somehow it worked. Today, Onstad is recognised as the northernmost surf spot in the world. The beach itself is a crescent of smooth stones and coarse sand, about half a mile long. On the best days, long, clean lines of waves form rides that last hundreds of feet. The water temperature hovers between 39 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit, even in summer. Surfers wear thick neoprene suits, gloves, boots, and hoods. A short drive east brings us to Henningsvær. One of the Lofoten Islands' most distinctive settlements. Unlike neighbouring villages, Henningsvær is spread across several small islands linked by bridges, giving it the nickname Venice of the North. The effect is unmistakable. Narrow channels, brightly coloured rawbure, and fishing boats moored along both sides of the main streets. Its location on small islands protects it from the open Norwegian Sea. Creating calm waters that allow fishing boats to dock safely even in rough weather. The natural harbour and proximity to rich fishing grounds made the village an essential hub for seasonal cod fisheries. Henningsvær is also known for something unexpected. A football field on a tiny islet, perched between the sea and steep cliffs. The unusual location, floating almost above the water and framed by mountains, caught the attention of photographers and media worldwide. Today, the field has become a symbol of the village, drawing football fans and travellers from across the globe. South of the Lofoten Islands, Saltstraumen is home to the strongest tidal current in the world. Every 6 hours, as the tide changes, nearly 110 billion gallons of seawater rush through a channel less than 500 feet wide. The difference in sea level between the two sides can reach over 3 feet. Forcing water through the strait at speeds up to 25 miles per hour. The result is a natural spectacle of whirlpools and standing waves. A continuous surge of power that has been repeating for thousands of years. Standing on the Saltstraumen Bridge, you can look straight down into the chaos. The current swirls in vast circular eddies, each one large enough to spin a small boat. It's one of the few places in the world where you can stand safely on shore and watch nature's raw mechanics unfold just below you. Despite its intensity, Saltstraumen has a rhythm. For about an hour during slack tide, the water calms and the surface briefly smooths before the next surge begins. Leaving the jagged coasts of Lofoten behind, the journey east leads to Lapland, a vast region stretching across northern Scandinavia and even into Russia. In Finland and Sweden, Lapland is defined by forests and fells, rolling mountains that rarely rise above 2,000 feet, but stretch endlessly across the horizon. Here, the Arctic is no longer about steep cliffs and fjords, it's about expanses. The slow rhythm of nature. Lapland is sparsely populated, towns are few and far between, and the population density often drops below 2 people per square mile. Geographically, Finnish and Swedish Lapland are dominated by boreal forests. Interrupted occasionally by lakes and glacial valleys. The landscape feels horizontal rather than vertical. Mountains are distant shapes, while conifer trees stretch beneath endless Arctic skies. For many outside Scandinavia, Lapland carries another identity. The home of Santa Claus. The connection may be modern and partly commercial, but it also reflects the deep winter landscapes, and long nights that have fueled northern imagination. And the town most closely associated with the spirit of Christmas is Rovaniemi, the capital of Finnish Lapland. After World War II, it was rebuilt with the help of architect Alvar Aalto, who designed its street plan in the shape of a reindeer's head. But what really made Rovaniemi world famous wasn't architecture or geography. It was Santa Claus. Around a small log cabin built for Eleanor Roosevelt, former First Lady of the United States, grew what is now Santa Claus Village, the heart of Rovaniemi's tourism industry. Wooden buildings draped in light sit exactly on the Arctic Circle. A painted line cuts across the snow, marking the latitude 66 degrees north. Inside Santa's office, visitors from all over the world, families from Japan, Spain or Canada, come to meet Santa in person. Nearby, the Santa Claus main post office receives over 500,000 letters each year addressed simply to Santa Claus, Arctic Circle, Finland. Every piece of mail is read and sorted by local staff and volunteers who also hand out postcards stamped with a special Arctic Circle postmark. Above, the sky itself becomes part of the landscape. For much of the year, the nights are long, cold, and completely still. And when the solar wind sweeps across Earth's magnetic field, the darkness ripples in shades of green, violet, and red. This is the Aurora Borealis, the Northern Lights, one of the most familiar and yet least predictable natural phenomena on the planet. You can see it across the Arctic, but Lapland offers some of the best conditions anywhere in the world. The air is clean and dry, the light pollution minimal, and the sky clear for long stretches of winter. The science behind it is well understood. Charged particles from the sun collide with gases in the upper atmosphere, exciting oxygen and nitrogen atoms that then release energy as light. But science doesn't make the sight any less strange. Standing on a frozen lake under a silent sky, it feels like the atmosphere itself has begun to move. The colours shimmer and bend. The light appears to flow in slow motion. Cameras capture it easily, but the naked eye sees something more subtle. A living, breathing veil. If there's one animal that defines Lapland, it's the reindeer. They're part of the region's identity, woven into the rhythm of life in the Arctic. They move easily through snow on broad, hoofed feet that act like natural snowshoes. Their fur is hollow, trapping air and insulating them against low temperatures. Both males and females grow antlers, one of the few deer species where that's the case, and they shed them annually. In Finnish Lapland, there are roughly 200,000 reindeer, nearly as many as people. They aren't wild in the strict sense. All are owned by local herders, most of them Sami, the indigenous people of the region. Reindeer herding is both an economic activity and a way of preserving identity. A livelihood that requires patience and respect for the land. For visitors, encounters with reindeer are often part of Lapland's tourism experience. Short sleigh rides or guided tours at family-run farms. While designed for comfort and photographs, many herders see them as a way to share and sustain a fragile tradition. In western Sweden, forested hills of Lapland rise into a world of rock and ice. Here stands Kebnekaise, Sweden's highest mountain and the crown of the Scandinavian range. It's not the Himalayas or the Alps. There are no towering peaks or deep valleys carved by massive glaciers. But Kebnekaise has its own kind of grandeur. The mountain reaches almost 7,000 feet above sea level, though that number changes every year. The summit once had two peaks. A southern one covered by a glacier and a northern one made of bare rock. For most of modern history, the ice-covered peak was the highest point in Sweden. But as the glacier has slowly melted, it's been shrinking by several feet every decade. And now, the rocky northern top often stands taller. Even here in the deep Arctic north, the climate's steady warming is visible in the shape of a mountain. The range sits west of Kiruna, surrounded by miles of tundra and alpine valleys that stretch nearly untouched. About 25 miles north of Iceland's mainland, Grimsey Island marks the country's only point inside the Arctic Circle. It's small, just 2 square miles of grassy cliffs and lava rock. But what it lacks in size, it makes up for in character. The Arctic Circle cuts directly across it, making Grimsey a place where you can, quite literally, step in and out of the Arctic in a single stride. The island feels far removed from the rest of Iceland. Only about 60 people live here year-round, mostly fishermen and their families. The landscape is pure North Atlantic. Sheer cliffs dropping straight into the sea, covered with moss and thrift, and filled with the sound of birds. Grimsey is one of Iceland's most important seabird colonies, home to tens of thousands of puffins. In summer, the air buzzes with life as puffins return from the open ocean to nest in burrows along the grassy slopes. Their orange beaks and round, almost comical faces have made them unofficial mascots of the island. South of Grimsey, Iceland sits on a fault line, a literal continental rift, where two massive plates of the Earth's crust slowly drift apart. To the west lies the North American plate, to the east, the Eurasian. They move away from each other by roughly an inch a year. And as they do, the island cracks and steams. Near Lake Mývatn, this restless geology shows its power in a place called Herverir. It's a geothermal field, a landscape stripped bare of vegetation, stained in shades of orange, yellow, and grey. It's not the kind of place where life flourishes, but it's one that makes you acutely aware of the earth breathing beneath your feet. The ground here is hot enough to boil water. In some spots, mud pools bubble and pop like thick stew, reaching temperatures over 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Thin crusts of clay hide scalding pockets just below the surface. A reason why the trails are carefully marked and visitors are warned not to step outside them. The soundscape is as strange as the view, a constant hiss of escaping steam. The gurgle of boiling mud and the low rumble of the planet's internal pressure. Hundreds of rivers flow from the ice caps in the highlands toward the Arctic coast, cutting through volcanic terrain and forming countless waterfalls. Among them, Godafoss is one of Iceland's most beautiful and storied, and one that holds a special place in the country's history. Dropping 40 feet into a pool below, it's not the tallest waterfall in Iceland, but few others combine such symmetry, volume, and myth. The name means waterfall of the gods. According to Icelandic sagas, it dates back to around the year 1000 AD. The story goes that a local chieftain and law speaker at the Iceland's parliament was tasked with resolving the growing conflict between the old faith and the new. After deep thought, he decided that Iceland should adopt Christianity as its national religion to avoid division and bloodshed. When he returned home, he symbolically cast his carved wooden idols of the old Norse gods into this waterfall. The act marked the end of one era and the beginning of another, and the site became known as Godafoss. After plunging over the cliffs at Godafoss, the river continues its long journey north, finally reaching the Arctic Ocean. And where it meets the sea, on the edge of Skjolfandi Bay, lies the small town of Husavik. The name means Bay of Houses, and according to Icelandic sagas, it may have been the site of Iceland's first permanent settlement. Home to only 2,500 people, Husavik has become known far beyond Iceland's shores as the whale-watching capital. The deep, cold waters of the bay are among the richest feeding grounds in the North Atlantic. Here, nutrient currents rise from the depths, drawing an incredible variety of marine life. From plankton to herring, and from herring to whales. In summer, the bay turns into a natural stage. Humpback whales, minke whales, and occasionally orcas come to feed. There are few other places on Earth where encounters with these animals feel so natural. In western Iceland, the land narrows into a long finger of the Snæfellsnes Peninsula that reaches out toward the sea. A place locals often call Iceland in miniature. Everything that defines the island seems to be found here. Volcanoes, lava fields, glaciers, and quiet fishing towns. At the tip of the peninsula rises Snæfellsjökull, a glacier-capped volcano that dominates the skyline. Its summit reaches over 4,700 feet, and on clear days it can be seen from Reykjavik. Along the southern shore, villages cling to the base of the cliffs. Basalt columns and sea arches form a natural fortress around their tiny harbours. On the northern coast, the peculiar shape of Kirkjufell forms one of the most photographed images of Iceland. The name means church mountain, and with its perfectly symmetrical peak rising straight from the sea, it's easy to see why. Just beside it, Kirkjufell's Foss, a small but graceful waterfall, completes the scene that's become an icon of Icelandic travel. Changing climate reshapes landscapes everywhere, and at Jökulsárlón, the transformation is visible in real time. What was once a frozen valley beneath a massive glacier is now a lake filled with drifting icebergs. The lagoon began forming less than a century ago, around 1934, as warmer temperatures caused the glacier to pull back from the Atlantic coast. Meltwater filled the depression it left behind, creating a deep basin that has grown steadily ever since. Today, Jökulsárlón stretches over 11 square miles and plunges to more than 650 feet, making it Iceland's deepest lake. The result is a landscape of light and reflection. Icebergs break away from the glacier's face and drift across the lagoon. Some are blindingly white, others glow deep blue or streaked with black volcanic ash. The lagoon connects to the Atlantic Ocean through a short channel, and the tide plays its part in this frozen choreography. When the current turns, icebergs are pulled toward the shore. Washing up on a stretch of black volcanic sand known as Diamond Beach. Under sunlight, the chunks of ice sparkle like glass, scattered across the dark sand. A fleeting display that changes by the hour as the ocean reclaims its jewels. Meanwhile, Reynisfjara, Iceland's most famous black sand beach, is a place shaped not by melting glaciers, but by the raw and menacing power of the ocean. The waves here are among the strongest in the North Atlantic. Without warning, sneaker waves can surge far up the beach, sweeping away anything in their path. The water drops off sharply just beyond the shoreline, and powerful currents make it impossible to swim. The sand here isn't really sand at all. It's volcanic rock, ground into fine grains by centuries of waves. Reynisfjara's most striking feature is its wall of basalt columns, rising like organ pipes from the base of the cliffs. These perfectly geometric formations were created when lava cooled and contracted into hexagonal shapes. Just offshore, 3 towering sea stacks rise from the water. The Reynisdrangar. According to Icelandic folklore, they were once trolls who tried to drag a ship to shore. When dawn broke, the first light of the sun turned them to stone. Sailing west from Iceland, we arrive in Greenland, the largest island on Earth. And one of the most remote inhabited places in the Northern Hemisphere. Nearly 80% of the land is covered by the Greenland Ice Sheet, a frozen expanse up to 10,000 feet thick. It holds about 10% of the world's freshwater, locked in ancient ice that has been building for nearly 3 million years. Only a narrow fringe of land around the coast remains ice-free. And it's here that nearly all 57,000 inhabitants live. The scale of Greenland is difficult to grasp. From north to south, it spans over 1,600 miles. About the distance from Scotland to the Sahara. For thousands of years, the island has been home to the Inuit. Descendants of peoples who migrated eastward from Canada. Hunting, fishing and respect for nature form the backbone of life here. Even as modern technology has reached the most isolated villages. On Greenland's rugged southwest coast, tucked between granite cliffs and deep fjords, lies Nuuk, the world's northernmost capital. With a population of about 19,000, it's home to roughly a third of the island's people. Small by any global standard, yet in Greenlandic terms, Nuuk is the centre of everything. The country's political, cultural and economic heart. The city's story begins in 1728 when Danish missionary Hans Agede founded a small colony here. The oldest part of town, known as Old Nuuk, still preserves wooden buildings from that time. Nuuk is also the administrative core of Greenland's self-rule government, established in 1979. Though still part of the Danish realm, the island governs most of its internal affairs, including education, health, and natural resources. In recent years, discussions about full independence have gained momentum, fueled by national pride and growing control over the island's future. Outside the inland town of Kangerlussuaq, about 190 miles northeast of Nuuk, the road climbs gently out of the valley until the horizon turns white. There, at the edge of the Greenland Ice Sheet, lies Russell Glacier. A frozen wall that marks the boundary between solid land and the vast interior of ice that covers more than 80% of the island. A rough gravel road leads right up to it, ending at a viewpoint where you can stand within a few hundred feet of the ice front. As it flows slowly downhill, it creaks, groans, and occasionally releases deep, thunder-like cracks. Meltwater runs in a milky stream coloured by glacial silt, winding its way back toward the Davis Strait. It's one of the few places where visitors can see the ice sheet up close without a long expedition. A direct encounter with the frozen heart of the island. The name of a colourful coastal town of Ilulissat simply means icebergs in Greenlandic, and that's exactly what defines it. Brightly painted houses stand on rocky slopes above the bay, connected by wooden walkways and narrow gravel roads. Every day, massive blocks of ice drift past the harbour, carried by the current into Disco Bay. They come from one of the most productive glaciers on Earth, the Cermek Kuyalik, the centrepiece of the UNESCO-listed Ilulissat Ice Fjord. Located about 25 miles inland, it flows from the Greenland Ice Sheet toward the sea at a speed of nearly 100 feet per day. At its front, icebergs the size of buildings carve off with deep, echoing cracks, tumbling into the fjord. Some of these icebergs rise over 300 feet above the waterline, and what you see is only a fraction of their true size. The rest lies hidden below the surface. It's estimated that the glacier produces around 35 cubic miles of ice annually. Covering the whole bay with a layer of white shards. North of Ilulissat, about 50 miles along Greenland's rugged coast, the Eqi Glacier is known for its dramatic and frequent calving. The ice tongue stretches roughly 2 miles across, its face rising nearly 200 feet above the waterline. The surrounding mountains reflect in the calm water. And when the air is still, you can hear the glacier groaning with a low, constant sound. Every few minutes, a section of ice gives way. First a sharp crack, then a roar, followed by a wall of spray as the ice plunges into the sea. On a small bluff overlooking the fjord stand a handful of simple wooden cabins powered by solar panels. From there you can sit on the deck and watch the glacier for hours. Through the long glow of the Arctic summer. Across the ice shield, far from the capital and the shipping lanes, another extraordinary natural formation awaits us. Scoresby Sund, the largest fjord system in the world. cutting deep into the island's icy heart. It's a labyrinth of channels and inlets that stretches nearly 215 miles inland and covers an area roughly the size of Portugal. This is Greenland at its most raw and elemental. A place of colossal scale and profound silence. The fjord's walls rise thousands of feet above the water, their bases carved smooth by the slow grind of glaciers. Vast icebergs drift through the calm, dark water, some the size of city blocks, casting long shadows under the low Arctic sun. The fjord takes its name from William Scoresby, a British whaler and explorer who charted the area in 1822. Some of the icebergs that fill the fjord drift for years before melting, their shapes slowly transformed by wind and tide. In late summer, the ice thins just enough for small expedition ships to navigate the outer fjord, carrying scientists and travellers. At the mouth of Scoresby Sund, where Greenland's vast fjord system meets the Arctic Ocean, lies one of the most isolated settlements on Earth. Ittoqqortoormiit. The name means big house dwellers. A fitting description for a community that stands alone amid some of the most imposing natural architecture on the planet. With around 350 residents, Ittoqqortoormiit is the only town for hundreds of miles in any direction. To the west stretch the ice-choked waters of Scoresby Sund. To the east lies the open Arctic Ocean. There are no roads leading here. Only a small airstrip a few miles away, connected to the town by snowmobile or boat when weather allows. The settlement was founded in 1925 as part of a Danish initiative to establish a permanent community on Greenland's uninhabited east coast. A group of Inuit families from the west coast travelled more than 600 miles by ship to start new lives here. Ittoqqortoormiit is one of the last regions in the Arctic where traditional subsistence hunting remains central to daily life. Providing both food and cultural continuity. Farther up, Greenland's western coast rises one of the island's most striking landmarks. The heart-shaped mountain of Murmansk. An unmistakable silhouette of a 3,800-foot peak of sheer granite. Split in two like a colossal symbol carved by time and frost. Beneath it lies a small town that shares its name. Murmansk, which in Greenlandic means heart-shaped. With around 1,200 inhabitants, it's one of the larger communities in northern Greenland. The town sits on a small island surrounded by icy fjords, with the towering mountain as its constant backdrop. Founded in 1763 by Danish colonists, Uummannaq quickly became an important base for fishing and hunting. Danish and Greenlandic children are told that Santa Claus lives in a bay in the west of the island. A turf hut was built there for a Danish television program and remains Santa's home in the popular imagination. Far from Greenland's coastal settlements lies a different world. The inland tundra, a vast and silent expanse of rock and moss. And it's here that one of the Arctic's oldest survivors still roams, the musk ox. Though it's not really an ox at all, but a distant cousin of sheep and goats. Its ancestors walked the earth long before modern humans reached these latitudes. Around 25,000 musk oxen live on the island, mostly in the central and northeastern regions. They prefer the dry, wind-swept plateaus of the Greenland ice cap's fringes, where low shrubs and lichens cling to the ground. Beneath their long, shaggy outer coat lies a layer of an incredibly fine underwool that's 8 times warmer than sheep's wool. Musk oxen were once nearly wiped out in parts of Greenland. Overhunting and environmental changes pushed them toward extinction. But in the 1960s and 1970s, small herds from northeast Greenland were reintroduced to the west. The population took hold, and today the musk ox has reclaimed much of its ancient range. In Canada, on the very edge of the Arctic Ocean, lies Tuktoyaktuk, or simply Tuk, as locals call it. It's a small Inuvialuit community in the Northwest Territories. Perched on a low stretch of tundra where the land meets the Beaufort Sea. A cluster of brightly coloured houses surrounded by a maze of frozen lakes, muddy inlets, and strange, rounded hills that rise from the flat landscape. Those hills aren't mountains or dunes, they're pingos. Natural ice domes that grow out of the permafrost. Tuktoyaktuk has more of them than anywhere else on Earth. In fact, the name itself means looks like caribou. a nod to the way the pingos resemble the silhouettes of grazing animals across the horizon. A pingo forms when pressurized groundwater freezes and expands beneath the surface, slowly pushing the soil upward into a dome. Some of them can grow over 150 feet tall and more than 2,000 feet wide, taking centuries to reach their full height. Tuktoyaktuk's surrounding landscape is dotted with dozens of these frozen giants, and two of the most famous have become natural landmarks. Leaving Tuktoyaktuk behind, a gravel road stretches south into the heart of the Arctic wilderness. The Dempster Highway, one of the most remote and spectacular routes in North America, 456 miles of gravel and permafrost. Built in the 1950s and completed in 1979, it follows an old dog sled route used in the early 20th century. The first section of the Dempster cuts through the Yukon's Ogilvy Mountains. A landscape unlike anywhere else in Canada. These are not towering peaks, but rather a maze of ridges, valleys, and plateaus sculpted by glaciers and frost. The mountains are ancient, among the oldest on the continent. Their slopes built from folded limestone and shale that date back hundreds of millions of years. Some of the cliffs still hold fossilized coral reefs, remnants of ancient tropical seas that once covered this land. A strange thought, considering that the Arctic wind can drop temperatures below minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit in winter. Another lonely northern route winds its way from Fairbanks in Alaska to the distant oil fields of Prudhoe Bay. The Dalton Highway, a 414-mile stretch of gravel and ice that cuts through the wilderness toward the Arctic Ocean. Built in the 1970s to support construction of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, it remains a lifeline for the workers who keep that steel artery flowing. The Dalton isn't a highway in the ordinary sense. Truckers call it the Haul Road, and they drive it year-round through snow, sleet, and fog. The Yukon River Bridge marks the first major crossing. And the only one over this great river in Alaska. Beyond the Yukon, the highway climbs to Atigun Pass. A narrow gateway between the forested interior and the Arctic tundra beyond. Here, trees vanish, and the landscape flattens into the North Slope. A cold, wind-beaten plain that seems to stretch forever. The permafrost lies just beneath the surface, and for most of the year, the ground is locked in ice. At the end of the Dalton Highway, the road stops, not with a sign or a milestone, but with the sea. From Prudhoe Bay, the Arctic Ocean stretches toward the pole. And further west, along that same frozen coast, lies Utqiagvik. Once known as Barrow, the northernmost community in the United States. There are no highways to reach it. From Deadhorse, only air connects this place to the rest of Alaska. Life here exists at the edge of what's possible. Average winter temperatures hover around minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and storms sweep in from the Arctic. The ground is permafrost, so every building is raised on stilts to prevent heat from melting the frozen soil beneath. Despite the isolation, Utqiagvik isn't the end of the world, though it can feel that way. It's the top, a place where the land narrows into sea, and the compass points to nothing but cold. At the edge of the Bering Sea, among the windy, frozen tundra, stands Nome. A settlement that rose from nothing when gold was found not in the mountains, but right on the beach. The news spread faster than the Arctic wind. Within a year, nearly 20,000 people had flooded this isolated shore. Nome's gold wasn't buried deep. It shimmered right there, in the sands. People shoveled the shore itself, building makeshift camps along the coast. Today, you can still find the wooden dredges that clawed through riverbeds a century ago, left to rust in the tundra. And the old Nome Council Road follows the path of early miners, leading past rivers that still hide traces of gold. Nome feels like the end of America, and maybe it is. From here, the horizon disappears in a flat grey line. But only 55 miles away lies another continent, another world. Across the Bering Strait begins Chukotka, the farthest eastern region of Russia. The edge of Siberia, where Asia meets the Pacific. Crossing that narrow stretch of water is like stepping not just into another country, but into another day. The international date line runs right between the two Diomede Islands. You can literally see tomorrow from Nome. Harsh tundra. Winters that last most of the year, summers that flash by in weeks. Few places on Earth feel as remote. In the Soviet years, the land became a frontier of extraction. Workers were flown in, camps were built, and when the mines closed, the towns were left behind. Today, abandoned settlements lie scattered across the region. Rows of empty barracks, rusting machinery, Anadyr, the capital, is an exception. Brightly painted apartment blocks stand against the endless tundra. But behind the colour lies the same reality. Isolation, expensive supplies flown in by plane, a life shaped by distance. In Chukotka, where there are no railways and only a handful of permanent roads, winter brings connection. When the rivers freeze solid and the tundra hardens into steel, a hidden network of ice roads comes to life. They are not marked on most maps, and they never last long. By late spring, the Arctic sun melts them back into rivers and swamps. Yet for the people of Chukotka, these seasonal roads are essential. The arteries that keep remote communities supplied through the long, dark winter. Construction of an ice road is more art than engineering. Bulldozers and trucks pack down snow over frozen rivers. Supplies that would be impossible to fly in, fuel, construction materials, food, machinery, are hauled across the tundra in long columns. The convoys move slowly, often at 15 to 20 miles per hour. Drivers travel in pairs or groups, equipped with food for several days. Out here, a breakdown can mean hours of waiting in temperatures that plunge below minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit. One of these ice roads lead us to Pevek, the northernmost city in Russia that rises from the coast of the East Siberian Sea. At its Soviet peak, about 25,000 people lived here. Now, fewer than 5,000 remain. But Pevek is not just a relic of Soviet industry. It has become an important stop on the northern sea route. The Arctic shipping lane that stretches from Murmansk to Vladivostok. With ice receding each summer, more ships now pass through these waters, cutting weeks off the journey between Europe and Asia. Pevek's port, once forgotten, is now strategic. Tankers and cargo vessels dock here, resupplying, waiting for icebreakers to clear the way. Along the remote coastlines of Chukotka, the shores are dominated not by human activity, but by another presence. Walruses. Massive, wrinkled, and unmistakable. These marine mammals haul out on rocky beaches and ice floes in numbers that can reach into the thousands. Walruses are a cornerstone of the Arctic ecosystem here. Their sheer size, bulls can weigh over 3,700 pounds and stretch 12 feet long, means they leave lasting impressions on the beaches they inhabit. The coast of Chukotka serves as one of the largest haul-out sites in the world. Younger males often dominate the edges, while the older, larger bulls claim the centre of the herd. Mothers keep their calves close, guiding them through shallow waters with careful nudges. Walruses are highly adapted to the Arctic environment. Their thick skin and layers of blubber insulate them from the frigid waters. And their tusks, more than ornamental, are practical tools. Used for climbing onto ice, for defense, and for establishing dominance within the herd. There are very few permanent roads in this part of Siberia. Building them is hard. Keeping them alive is harder. Permafrost doesn't forgive mistakes. The Khibiny Highway is one of the few. It runs for more than 1,200 miles, connecting Yakutsk to Magadan on the Pacific coast. Locals call it the Road of Bones. And that name isn't just poetry. The highway was built by prisoners during Stalin's reign. Thousands died from cold and hunger in the work camps scattered along the route. Their bodies, it is said, are buried in the road itself. The bones became part of the foundation. Along the way, settlements appear and vanish, some still alive, others silent. Abandoned towns lie scattered along the roadside. Wooden houses leaning, windows broken, paint stripped by decades of frost and wind. These places once held miners, loggers, prisoners. When the mines closed and the camps emptied, there was nothing left to keep people there. They walked away, leaving only skeletons of villages behind. Siberia hides landscapes that don't fit into the cliches of endless forest and frozen wasteland. The Putorana Plateau is one of them. It lies far above the Arctic Circle, locked away from roads and cities. a place so remote that even most Russians have never seen it. Towering basalt plateaus stretch to the horizon, broken by deep canyons and hundreds of waterfalls. In fact, some geographers call it the land of 10,000 lakes and 1,000 waterfalls. The numbers aren't poetry, they're an understatement. About 250 million years ago, volcanoes here flooded Siberia with lava, layer upon layer, until the land rose into this massive basalt plateau. Later, glaciers carved it, rivers sliced through it, and time left behind a labyrinth of gorges, cliffs, and steps. There are no highways to the plateau. To get in, you fly by helicopter or trek for days through taiga and tundra. It's one of the last places where true wilderness doesn't just exist, it dominates. Beyond the remote expanses of the Putorana Plateau, with its jagged cliffs, lies one of the most striking contrasts in the Arctic, Norilsk. Unlike the untouched wilderness that surrounds it, Norilsk is a city built entirely for industry. One of the northernmost urban centres in the world. And a place where human ambition has carved a presence into some of the planet's most inhospitable terrain. The city grew around mining and smelting operations. Exploiting the massive deposits of nickel and copper beneath the ground. Norilsk is heavily industrialised, with massive smelters dominating the skyline and clouds of sulfur dioxide and other pollutants visible from miles away. The air is among the most contaminated on Earth, and the environmental impact is severe. Forests downwind are dead or dying. Rivers and lakes show signs of acidification, and wildlife is affected across the surrounding tundra. Stretching deep into the Arctic waters of northwest Siberia, the Yamal Peninsula is the centre of Russia's richest natural gas reserves. A land synonymous with energy, pipelines, drilling platforms, and industrial complexes sprawling across the permafrost. Yet among this flat, endless stretch of tundra, locked in ice for most of the year, life continues as it has for millennia. Temperatures here easily drop below minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and the sun can vanish for months. Most people would call it unlivable. For the Nenets, it's home. There are nomads moving with the seasons across Yamal, following the migrations of their reindeer herds. The animals are everything: transport, food, clothing, and shelter. A Nenets camp rises in the form of tombs, conical tents of reindeer hide. Life here is stripped to its essentials. After brief stops, families dismantle their temporary homes, load everything onto sleds pulled by reindeer, and move on. There are no shortcuts, no backups, just knowledge passed down for generations and a stubborn resilience that makes the impossible ordinary. The Nenets don't live in the past, they live in the present more fully than most people ever do. Founded as part of Stalin's industrial ambitions, Vorkuta began not as a settlement of free people, but as one of the most notorious outposts of the Gulag system. Its mines were carved out by prisoners, men and women brought here from across the Soviet Union. For many, this was the end of the line, a place from which few returned. Coal was Vorkuta's reason for existence. During the height of Soviet industrialization, its mines fueled the machinery of an expanding state. Dozens of labour camps once surrounded the city, collectively known as the Vorkutlag, housing tens of thousands of prisoners. After Stalin's death, Vorkuta gradually transformed from a forced labour colony into a mining town inhabited by free workers. When the Soviet Union collapsed, many of the mines closed, the population began to decline, and once busy neighbourhoods turned into ghost districts. Today, fewer than 50,000 people remain, most of them tied in some way to the coal industry or public services. Another place that bears scars of the Stalin's regime is the Solovetsky Islands. In fact, Solovki was where it began. In the 1400s, two monks, Savity and Herman, founded a monastery here, carving out a sanctuary among the rocks and pines. The Solovetsky monastery grew into one of Russia's most important religious centres, a symbol of faith at the edge of the known world. But isolation is a double-edged thing. What protects also confines. And what begins in faith can end in fear. In the 1920s, the Solovetsky Special Purpose Camp became the model for what would later spread across the Soviet Union, the Gulag system. Many who ended up in Vorkuta or Kolyma first passed through here. Prisoners felled timber, quarried stone, and struggled through winters that froze the sea solid. Some were priests who once served in the monastery, others were scholars, farmers or workers caught in the machinery of ideology. Solovki show how closely human faith and cruelty can coexist. How how the same walls that once sheltered prayer later contained suffering. In the Arctic, climate and weather push everything to the edge. Nothing here is ordinary. The cold is sharper, the storms heavier, the distances wider than they look on any map. This has always been a region that tests whoever enters it. And yet, for centuries, the Arctic has drawn people who looked north and saw not emptiness, but possibility. Even now, with satellites and icebreakers and weather stations scattered across the tundra, that feeling hasn't vanished. It's a hard place to call home, but for those who do, it offers a kind of clarity, a directness that modern life elsewhere often obscures. Today, the Arctic is changing. New ports, new mines, new shipping routes. The region is becoming a stage for global interests. But its ecosystems remain fragile. A few warm seasons, a thinning sheet of sea ice, a disrupted migration. Small changes here can echo far beyond the horizon.